That was a gratitude they felt they owed to him. He's out getting the money. They wanted to be there to show their appreciation. And I remember a lot of times he would come in, 8 or 10 preachers be in front of him, and somebody said, Reverend King. And he'd turn and follow that voice, and he began to shake hands all through that area. And a lot of times the minister said, Reverend King is running late. He said, oh no, we got plenty of time. Those ladies felt they knew Dr. King personally. That allowed the movement to continue.
I want to open up the floor so that you might ask some questions of the panelists. Ma'am?
I don't have a question.
Comments.
But my comment is, can you hear me?
No, you're very good.
Your previous question was about comments on Mr. Nixon and Mr. Lewis. And I heard a lot about Mr. Lewis, but Mr. Nixon, and you mentioned his education and you know how, what an age I forgot, but he was an educated man, Mr. Lewis. Rufus Lewis, Dr. Lewis,
E.D. Nixon
had a third grade education. And if you study the history about his impact on the movement, it's almost unbelievable how, but he had the determination and the drive, and as we would say in the old days, the mother will. He was, you know, we just had that desire. My mother, and there are 4 generations of my family were raised in the original poetry Baptist church. So I can relate to what you all are saying. My mother was married twice. Both husbands died. She raised 3 children, educated them all to the master's degree level and above. And she was a domestic worker. She did the housework, and she also drove artificial car food. She did the housework. She took in washing and ironing. She served parties at the same time. Who those people on the jury stuff, the big jury stuff, the clock down.
Yeah,
Klein and Son.
Klein, you know, she went around her whole white apron and her whole white, and I remember this. At third party, she put all of us through school. But that was the kind of determination that we had at that time. And I'm sure that was the kind of determination that drove Mrs. Nixon. Mrs. Nixon continued up until the time of his death. He worked with Mr. Thomas Bobo, Dr. Thomas Bobo, who was the superintendent at the Montgomery Public Schools. Mr. Nixon sat on those boards with Mr. Bobo. He still had an influence on education up into his later years of life. So he started off in this movement, but he has had more effect on the movement and probably education than a lot of people realize. And I won't say a lot of people realize, because if you don't know, you don't know. But I happen to know because I work with federal programs under this program when I was there when all this was happening. And he's just a man who needed a little bit more speaking about.
indeed. And Mr. Nixon was a Pullman porter. And if you read the history of African American people and the struggle for justice, we know that the Pullman Porters Union, of which Mr. Nixon was one of the local leaders that helped get it organized, was a strong agency in addition to the church and to some of the other organizations that our panelists have spoken of that helped to promote justice. So those comments are deeply appreciated. Thank you.
And it's amazing, my mother had an 8th grade education, but she taught us to read. She taught us secretly. Every night she read a book to us, and it was one she brought from the white folks' house, as we said then. And I still have the book now. It was called Just David. It was about a little white boy who lived on a farm. Every night she read a chapter. But the next night, we had to tell her what she read the night before. And she was teaching us secrets, and but that was just a part of her upbringing. I guess she saw white folks reading their children, so she said, what's good enough for them is good enough for mine. And we had their broken dishes. We sat at the dining room table. We learned, all kinds of courtesies and refinement. And I'll tell the story, and I'll be quiet. There was a young man, we lived on Cleveland Avenue. download cars, and there was an alley. We called them alleys then because there were dirt streets running off of the main street. There was an alley there called Minto. But Mama, we were poor, but we didn't know it. But, you know, she didn't say you don't associate with the folks on Minto. So there was a young man who she invited me in among others, who was, and back then all black boys went to the army. And he had never used a knife and fork before. So she taught him how to use a knife and fork. When he came back from the military, he came in a bank shirt. He said, Miss Holloway, I would have been sitting there with my pork chop in my hand, and I would have been embarrassed. He said, but because you took the time to teach me how to use a knife and fork, I was able to sit there and dig it.
Amen.
So, you know, that was the kind of people back then who were following up Dr. Lee. And like somebody said, we had been hurt so much.
You were ready.
You know, it was just that time.
Any other questions or comments? Let's get
Do you have a white person who can recommend you? Now, can you imagine? I had a college degree, didn't have a master's then, but I had a BS. And, you know, there was the person who said it, and I'm not saying which superintendent it was, but that was what got me my first job. Because, and what my mama did, the first white lady that wrote it, she didn't like the letter, so she went to the other white lady, and she wrote it. And that was how I got the job. So, yeah, we've been through it.
Thank you. Any other questions for our comments for the panelists? Sir.
Could you guys just briefly touch on Rowdy Gale and in the context of the city of Montgomery, and I guess even further in the lens of race relations, you know, once that decision was handed down by the panel, how did things change in Montgomery? Did they change? You know, did they not change? Did things turn out like you expected?
Well, you know, Congress is...
Take the mic, Mr. Malone, so they can hear you.
Yeah, well, see, out of, I don't know about change, but see, out of Alabama, you got basically a civil rights bill that came out of Birmingham, Alabama, under Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth. He organized that program. And so the program Reverend King was leading at the time was kind of filtering down. The spirit of the older people like myself was not participating. So Stokely Carmichael told Reverend King, said, let me help your son. And Reverend King agreed. So he went to the classroom and got the high school kids. And how do you do that? He said, well, you go into the classroom. He said, come rest, you come out and join us. Then some of the kids got up. Then all those who didn't get up, he said, y'all are nothing but a bunch of Uncle Toms. Then all of them got up. So the fire hose, the television played one of the major parts with the fire hose and the K-9 dogs. In 7 in Montgomery, when they killed Jimmy Lee Jackson, when killed Jose Williams' son, nephew, they were going to bring his body back to the state capitol and put it on the steps. But anyway, they turned it into the voting right march. So Lyndon Johnson told Reverend King, he said, man, he said, you just got a civil rights bill in 1964. He said, you must be out of your head to get another bill through this Congress. But Mrs. Viola Luzo was killed, and the Senate and Congress said, now she killed in the line of duty for the civil rights movement. And so they think the sympathy that the Congress and the Senate had at that time, the one that gave us the voting right bill. Things have changed because, you know, you got Alvin Holmes, you got the John Knight, and you got the Barack Obama.
Let me just put this plug in. You know, it's been a system of gradualism in Montgomery. You know, the public schools themselves, after the 1954 Act, Montgomery schools didn't integrate until 1970. And our teachers told us at Booker T. Washington at the time that, you know, this was coming. We may or may not be the participants in it, and we weren't because we said we left in '58, and the Montgomery public school system actually integrated in 1970. But the point I want to make to this audience, I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't. All of the gains that have been achieved under various administrations, all the presidents, all the way down up to where we are now, typically has been a level of advocacy has been a part of everything that has been achieved. And that advocacy was directed toward the persons, say, in the White House at the time. The executive order of the presidents have made a lot of difference in the rights that we have been able to gain. It's kind of ironic right now that our problem is not the person in the White House is not willing to extend that back to us. There's some other people in between that. Your advocacy, you got to have a new determination and a new breed of advocacy to communicate with the parties that are, quote, say, obstructing the president being able to carry out the things that we have fought for over the years. And I will say this, there's no resting ground in a civilization. You know, when you stop and rest, you're also going to be retrogressing. You're going to be losing ground. And I appeal to those persons who recently retired. I run across people say, I'm retired, you know, I'm not doing anything. Well, you need to be on the front line of the advocacy. Social media, on the internet, Facebook, Twitter, and all those social instruments are now the mediums of communication. And after we leave, you know, finish this, I'll be happy to talk to you about getting you wired up to Congress and all of the people who bear upon the success of our president today. We need to make sure that we are communicating our concerns there. Because if that doesn't happen, it creates a tremendous bottleneck of the things that we would be intentionally to receive that won't be happening. It's kind of ironic. In this state right now, we are looking for some support from the stimulus bill that our president has authored, put together, made it available. But the Alabama delegation, the congressional delegation from Alabama, is not supporting the stimulus bill. The governor has already made room in the budget to say we're going to be able to balance the budget because we're going to get so much from the stimulus bill. I think you have to agree that's the height of hypocrisy. We are going to have to get our advocacy together. Dr. King said this: in order for this to be successful, it's not only going to take minorities doing what they need to do, but one of the things that he said in speeches that writers they leave out, when he talked about his children not being measured by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, but he also said that it's going to take decent, committed whites coming together to make this happen. The movement in Montgomery was successful because there were a number of decent, committed whites who came in to make this happen. Thank you.
Briefly, I want to ask.
Okay, brief. Just one other thing that we talked. He asked about the changes. Where you take out in Alabama here in Montgomery, our legislative body, representatives, and all of those peoples, that was a change. And I haven't heard his name. I'm gonna call his name. Cause think a lot of them. Dr. Joe Reed. He did a lot before we had anybody in the state capitol down there, and paving the way by going to the capitol himself, putting legislation forward to get those peoples elected and make it possible for them to be elected. So I just want to say that. That's why we have as many legislators and representatives and things now, because of some of his work in the movement also.
George Wallace said, y'all called me a racist, but he said, y'all better be thinking about class. The Supreme Court recent decision says that the citizen versus the Federal Election Commission. That commission, that court order will be with us for the rest of our life. and it gave the corporation ultimate power, and that money what got Jesus on the cross, and with that decision could put all of freedom on the cross, because it's inescapable.